Good evening. A special welcome to former students. It's indeed heartwarming to see you all in person. When you came here, the international student fees were low. Housing in Montreal was affordable, and you could study minimum cost housing. As you realize, things have changed and are changing. But let's not go there. Today, what I'm going to talk about is, you have seen the kind of brief preview of it, is about toilets, affordable urban design, and housing, and growing food in cities. According to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Observatory statistics, between 2014 and 2018, the population of urban poor grew from 23% to almost 25% in cities. Their number is bigger than 100 million. And by 2030, it's assumed that we will be 6 billion, and 6 out of 10 people will be living in the cities. It's critical, I think, that architects, urban designers, and planners engage in this activity. As the housing problem of the poor have increased in cities around the world, and it's not just in the South, here too, the housing problems are mounting. It's just in its infancy, in my opinion. Once it starts crawling and it starts running, it's going to be a havoc, unless we engage. And designers do have a role to play. What you see here is a slum from Indore, where we work. But when you look at the image like this, you realize there is hardly any service, barely enough water supply, the infrastructure is quite fragile, and so on. Sanitation is a major problem. This is a precarious toilet in water, kind of a runoff in Indore, where we were working. And whatever solid waste is there is sent out. But remember, until 2004, all the cities along the St. Lawrence River were sending our waste in the river without treating. Only thing we didn't know is where it was going. We had an interface in between that took care of it, and our river was very vast, so it absorbed and absorbed. But Toronto sent it to Kingston, Kingston sent it to Montreal, Montreal sent it to Quebec City, and Quebec City sent it to the poor belugas. That's what was the system. And even today, we are not able to tackle, when we have big rains, the amount of waste that we have to treat in our systems, because we didn't have enough monies to invest to install our systems. So try to understand that even though what looks like an ordinary problem is a major problem, not just in the countries where there is hardly enough water to drink, but even in very developed countries with all the water, more than 20% of fresh water supply that we have. From very early days, minimum cost housing group was engaged in this. In 1973, when I came here as a student, we published Stop the 5-Gallon Flush. The question was, do we want to use want to send 1 liter of solid waste with 20 liters of water every time we flush. Should we not be looking at alternate systems? And there was tremendous interest in this. It's amazing. Coming from India, I was born in a house, a rented house, two-bedroom house. We had no electricity. We had running water for 2 hours a day. So water management was very important. And we had an outhouse for a toilet, which we shared. When I went to study undergraduate courses at SEP, I learned about traditional flush latrines, drainage slopes of 1 in 60, inspection chambers, manholes, nothing about low-cost sanitation or water conservation. I felt that this was tremendous, that here was a place which was doing things which mattered to ordinary people around the world. And Professor Ortega pointed it out that the problems here also were as acute, but they were out of sight and therefore out of mind. So indeed, we had some role to play. Suddenly, these ideas which were there, the book was very successful. We printed it in multiple editions. We sold by mail order 5,000 copies of Stuyvesant and Flush. In 1976, when World Bank and International Development Center decided to look for solutions for low-cost and affordable infrastructure and sanitation, they sought out minimum cost housing team. And Witold Rybczynski was made the lead to go look for appropriate solutions from around the world. They had resources, the World Bank, the IDRC, and others. They threw a wide net to collect data, early days of databases. 15 databases were accessed, 20,000 plus citations were collected, of which 188 were considered appropriate for low-cost sanitation, developing country, others. Because lots of the information which was there was related to tertiary treatment, industrial waste treatment, nuclear waste treatment, and so on, because the clientele was Americo-Eurocentric. A network of experts was identified. They were sent out, they worked with other groups of people, and then they brought back a lot of information. And in the final bibliography that was printed, we had about 500 citations with abstracts and so on. And Changrak Paul Prasad, who worked with Professor Rybczynski and Michael McGarry from IDRC, Changrak was at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. In Thailand at AIT, a center was set up for information to be spread. It's remarkable that this information base became a very important source for development in the region. In 2012, Melinda and Gates Foundation identified them, gave them big money for their toilet program, and in 2022, they became the Asian Center for Water and Sanitation Resources to really modernize this whole activity. There were other activities which took place. We had looked at answers which were better than hole in the ground and flush toilet. There were possible solutions in between. And one of the solutions which was identified in 1976 was the pore flush latrine. The alternate composting toilets which you see. The chambers are there. There is a little bifurcation, and you have a water trap on a squatting toilet. Very little water goes in it. It goes here, it's composted, and then when it's filled up, you divert it to this. a user doesn't know any difference between what our flush toilets are like or their toilets. And it works. And there are NGOs working in India and implementing this. Since late 1970s, Sulabh, an NGO, has converted close to 2 million household toilets, built and managed more than 10,000 public toilets, set up more than 30,000 school toilets, and upgraded close to 2,500 slums. The work is not done, but the scaling up of these ideas is happening in a big way around the world. And I feel that we had a very significant role to play, and people made jokes about it when we were working on it, senior colleagues, but it didn't touch us. I think that was a great beginning in making some difference in life of ordinary people. The international design engagement in the traditional sense also started to change in 1976 when UN Habitat was created. UN Habitat 1 was held at Vancouver. Architects from around the world descended. The International Union of Architects, the president, Jairatan Bhalla, said, in this discourse, architects are not being included. Something has to be done. There were national representations in that. They suggested that we do something. What to do? There were proposals made by different countries. And this is where the discourse started to grow. 1976, around the same time, Balkrishna Doshi passed through here and visited McGill and saw the work which we were doing and said, gee, perhaps we can collaborate on some collaborative projects in this idea. He went back in 1978, he founded his Vastu Shilpa Foundation to do research in architecture, design, urbanism, and human settlements. However, at that time in India, Chandigarh and Le Corbusier loomed large. For Chandigarh, they had designed great city. It was a new capital for the state of Punjab, and they had created housing for 13 different categories of work. Category 1 was for the prime minister, and category 13 was for the peons. This is the housing for the peons, and this is housing for the peon in Sector 22, designed by Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew's partnership. Look at the categories. So you have prime ministers, chief justices, clerks, peons, sweepers, everyone who worked for the government had housing. Here is a photograph of the science and hospital complex being built in Chandigarh, taken by Pierre Jeanneret. Folks who built the city were forgotten. Here you see them camping out right in front of the place, and where they have water for building, making mortar and other things, there they are washing, cleaning, and other things. They were left camping in these places. As a result, there was a proliferation of slums in a city like Chandigarh, where there was a vast quantity of housing built. But in other cities, even more severe problems were to be seen. And here is a picture of the slum in Delhi. The government responses were extremely severe. They rubber stamped the solutions very quickly. Here you see a typical block of housing which is laid out. In each city block, you have 12 plots, each measuring 3 meters by 7 meters, laid out back to back. And once you build, you're creating a housing stock, more than half the housing or so, which will have no windows. This situation you're trying to address, you're already creating without thinking through. Between 1975 and 77, 150,000 plus plots were laid out in Delhi. There are more than 200,000 plots like this in the colonies in Delhi. More than 1.5 million people are living in this housing. I think professionally we could do better, or could have done better. The World Bank stepped in between 1990, I don't remember the dates, let's not worry about the dates. Up to 1997, they did a number of projects. In Delhi, there were no projects because it was maintained by the central government. But in cities like Chennai and Mumbai, they built close to 30 large projects. Here is a project you see from Chennai. There too, kind of mechanical rubber stamping of the projects was quite very severe. It was important to examine what we were doing. Balkrishna Doshi had set up the foundation. We were fortunate that Robert Moylan decided to come and study with us. In the beginning of 1980s, after Doshi had set the foundation, he became a kind of a bridgehead between McGill and Vastushilpa Foundation. He went and started analyzing a sites and services project for his master's study. It was in early stages of development. He did a remarkable study. He arrived there, housing, he was accommodated easily, but then he got minimum housing. He camped out there, got himself a motorbike to move around, and did a very thorough study of how these sites and services project, where you are given a site and the owners build the housing, are progressively built. What he showed was also the kind of use of spaces in these communities. This was very important to undertake. And this is where he showed that in public spaces which were created in these housing, we could play a more important role as decision makers. His study of progressive growth of housing, this has become a classic, the observational recording of the whole process and rendering of it to show people and communicate how step by step people build their homes. And it's so beautifully done. I would say it must have been, you didn't patent it. Otherwise, nevertheless, what emerged out of this process was the following. We found that housing which is being built, if we decide to build sites and services projects, if we rubber stamp these places where spaces are forgotten and how in future these residents will be using these places has to be done, we have to reconsider the whole planning process. The progressive design seems to work okay. So therefore, progressive design also has to be looked at carefully, because in the project that he analyzed, he found that number of projects a number of homes had to reorganize their service courts and toilets and so on. If we be like building just a toilet, and more than half the toilets people change, the investment which are made up front were being wasted. So there the designers would have to do something about these kind of decisions. So therefore, what we thought would be very important to do as the next step was to go and look at informal housing which were created by people themselves and start analyzing how the public realm, starting from the threshold, was organized by people themselves. We were, with graduate students, I went and worked in the field, and here you see one of the sketchbooks which you had seen today, which are all part of the minimum cost housing archives at the Canadian Centre for Architecture. We identified 5 slums in central Indian city of Indore. And we, in those days, we were using ordinary cameras, so we would make sketches, measure drawings, and then we would record all the details about which camera, black and white film, color film, so that the information which was gathered in the field could be transferred and we could analyze this information here at McGill. We analyzed and divided what we observed into several sections. First, we looked at house extensions, the place in front of the dwelling that is normally a part of the public realm, but that has acquired private character through its use and physical modification. So it was an intermediate space zone between the house and the street, and it was replete with different kind of activities and so on. Look at a street that we measured in that area. The public realm is divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The public right-of-way where vehicular and other traffic is moving is 1/3, whereas the other spillover spaces are 1/3. So these extensions, the transitions, and other places where you, because the living areas are limited, the space is tight, washing, doing daily chores, and so on, would all spill out in these spaces. We classified all this information into a kind of graphic standards for designing low-cost housing. So the extensions were classified in stoops, platform, porches, outdoor rooms, and yards, and we meticulously measured those spaces and then showed that they were not very large, but they were very efficiently managed. We also found that compared to public housing, landscaping was very important in very poor housing. In public housing, what happens that you invest a lot of money in just trying to build the homes. By the time landscaping time comes, money runs out. So for the minister to come and open the project, they will put some potted plants, he will cut the ribbon, and that's the end of the landscaping. What a difference. When you look at a slum with number of shade-giving and different kinds of trees, as a canopy on these things, was just dramatic. There are shade-giving trees like neem. There are productive trees like drumstick, which you use for vegetables, for making curries, which have very strong dietary complementarities to increase your nutritional intakes and so on. So we classified different kinds of trees we observed and then included in the catalog. Just as the urban poor took in their own hands the provision of shelter, they also initiated a variety of commercial activities. Work activities are an integral part of living in housing. Here is a guy recycling wooden crates. These are old activities which might have changed. Now we have not this kind of crates, different kinds of crates, but the pallets are still the same, and the pallets are recycled in an amazing kind of way. If you go to all the transborder communities between United States and Mexico, in Tijuana and other areas, Here you see in the extension, women have gotten together and they are rolling noodles. Amazing stuff. They roll papads. Their value chains are not local, almost international. You go to any Indian restaurant, you will eat papad. Perhaps it was rolled in one of these communities. And this is what we documented, the range and variety of activities and the special requirements for these kinds of activities. And mobile activities where people come and repair things or sort out things, also find nice locations in the street intersections and widening of the streets and so on. Commercial business activities also were seen at the threshold and the business areas very closely. They acquired different physical and locational and house-related characteristics. They range from very modest, to quite ambitious. Two sisters have set up a little shop. Mother makes the rice roll, they come back from the school, they're selling it. Boy is selling potato charts. This is a mobile locksmith, and notice his bicycle and then his bag to carry his wares. A small, tight shop for selling candies, biscuits, daily needs. Here is a guy, takes his push cart, goes to the market, buys the vegetable, sets up the shop. Before doing so, he moves around the neighborhood, sells these wares. And that same push cart, that same type, say, somebody has set up a shop where they sell hand-rolled cigarettes, soap, sugar, small packets of things. The reason, because these people do not have resources enough to buy a big bottle of shampoo, but they want to have the same quality of life. So they are very discriminating consumers. They choose things well, and these are the people who provide them with the wares. In public housing, this kind of activities are missing, and what you find is mushrooms of these things emerging. And what you see is a kind of marketing strategy. You start with a push cart, and then you see, okay, you try it out with a little structure, then the wheels go away, they get sold to make another shop, and then it becomes a more permanent shop, and then this shop becomes a much more permanent shop, and here another kind of a shop selling, repairing bicycles and so on. Streets are used for circulation, of course, but for social and cultural interaction, in addition to household, commercial, work, and other activities. And look at the spread of these activities and the variety of streets which were there. And we produced these guidebooks. The black book looked at the spaces which were from the threshold beyond. And then we also very closely analyzed the plots and the geometry of the plots. These became kind of a guide for designing low-cost housing project. Around the same time, Balkrishna Doshi's foundation, office received the biggest housing commission in his life to design the city of Aranya. He did not put it in his private practice at that time, but he chose to put it in the Vastu Shilpa Foundation because he wanted to push research and experimentation which we were doing and feed this information into the design of the large project. So Aranya is located in central India, and over the years the traditional housing production was very slow. And what was happening was there was a big gap of housing that had built up. So the government put forward this proposal, and this was the proposal given to Vastu Shilpa Foundation. A typical rubber stamp solution, as you see there. Doshi's foundation, and we discussed these ideas and say, it doesn't really reflect the population of Indore where we had worked. instead of half the population, close to 66%, 65% population was very poor, what the government of India used to call economically weaker section. The housing has to be more for them, and then we have to have higher income people so that we can bring in services and sell their properties at a fair market value so that they all will have high level of infrastructure and services and progressive development. So what was done initially was a very simple exercise that Balkrishna Doshi asked his team of designers to do. He says, imagine those spaces which were there all scattered in this manner. Can we connect them as a linear tissue and connect the linear parkways? And still it was divided in 6 sectors, and then these were the initial studies, and then on this concept Balkrishna Doshi overlaid another layer of design where cross streets and blocks of housing would be kept, and what you will have here is this linear pathways running through of parks and areas, and these were the main streets which would run, and they would not be just like any typical street, but it would have at top of every block a special event taking place, so there would be opportunities to do things. The work was not fully done. Inside this block, there were a lot of housing units to be accommodated. And this is what was another critical part. The engineering teams that worked with it and so on raised the issue and say, if we have to put service sewer lines and waters on every street, that's very expensive. If we take out some plots like this, it will create a very similar kind of hierarchy at much finer grain neighborhood level and cluster level, and then what it will allow us to do is eliminate a complete line. 1/3 of the infrastructure could be eliminated, and then we will have a very special kind of housing organized in this manner. Moreover, you can see all these dwellings now. What I mentioned to you, what was happening in cities like Delhi and other places, where you will not get a second window in the back room or cross ventilation and others, they all had that possibility. So this was close to 70% of the housing guaranteed that you will have a higher level of circulation and ventilation. So this was the final plan that emerged of Aranya, where you had many different income groups, and we had arguments about it. We were not designing it, they were designing it, but we were working closely. And one argument which we lost, which I would say we should have really argued strongly, was the town was set north of the kind of original town, and World Bank and the Housing and Urban Development Corporation said the closest sector when you come from the city should be for the wealthy people, so that when they come, they don't see poor housing. And then the perimeter of the housing was again for higher income, middle income, and then all the low income housing. This is what was the beginning of Aranya. And you can see the initial construction taking place of handful dwellings. 2000, 2008, 2018. You see, we did a kind of continuous post-occupancy study of this project, and in 2018 was the last time we had a complete recording of this project, which you see. And what you can see, the argument was the poor people will not build, there will be missing teeth on the streets and other thing, and it would look very bad. When you arrive today also, there is a whole missing gate or the welcome in this city. Wealthy people are bigger speculators, I would say. or they have better ability to speculate than poor people. And even if they are few, it could have a very strong impact. Going back to the ideas which we had said about extensions and transitions and so on, if you look at it today, you see what is happening to Indore today, 30 plus years after. It's an amazing transition from this typical squatter structures, very modest homes, but the transition space, the ramps to bring in the scooters and motorbikes used for different kind of domestic activities as well as commercial activities. Housing has become a lever. So if you can build one story and rent the upper story, like the duplexes and triplexes we have, is a great way to build a house. So you see, and those were the slots which we were discussing in the cluster level. They all have become very different kind of precincts. Look at the presence of what I had mentioned. It may look like this is a real middle class housing, but you can see people are in that economic category. Here they have their push cart, they are running their push cart business, and you see the presence of these businesses. A very modest house, but you see here a woman is doing tailoring and repairing and so on. Unless you go and look at it and can read, you won't find out. Somebody is making food and you can bring it home from there. Small tuck shops like what you saw. Again, extremely tight, very efficiently laid out. Profusion of it. From the bicycle repair shop, the way we had seen, to other small grocery and daily items, to now it has changed because we have a big dynamic group of people living there. So this is a stationery store selling paper and notebooks for children to go to school. Education has become a great business. Look at the different publicities. Play school, Kidsy, Alpha, 8 to 10th, Dolphin, admissions open. And there you see, here is a house, there is a staircase, and it's on the rooftop, runs a school. Look at the number of schools. It's just mind-boggling what's happening. There is a guy making statues. Gods, goddesses, deities, everything. It's just amazing. And you may think it's just for local people. It's a national value chain. Those deities which are made in slums of Ahmedabad end up in Mumbai. And here is my cousin. She is a judge of all these little shrines which would be established in Mumbai. And then they would be immersed in the sea after the ceremonies are completed. So the value chains for hand-rolled cigarettes, for papads, for noodles, for dogs, goddesses, you would not imagine are not just short and only for the committee, but they also serve the community. You can see an explosion of temples and shrines in this community. So from the front of the house to the little open spaces to kind of cluster level open spaces to big temples. And different faiths. India's got numerous. And here in those open spaces, things have gotten transitioned into paved areas, play areas, landscaped areas, and you can see it's an amazing transition from just that linear park to a very successful civic promenade. That's what Aranya looks like. Remember the kind of beginning when it was just, today close to 100,000 people live there. And the project is not just an expense. It is an economic activity, it's an economic asset building vehicle, and so on. And watch out, Starbucks. Here is a guy frothing coffee with a little pressure cooker. He's just waiting to sell the franchise. Let's talk about good quality food, or lack thereof, in poor communities. So in the housing field, we did this work, and we also were involved in similar projects in big way in China. We also were involved in the beginning of the 1970s. When I came, we did the rooftop wasteland project. And the project working in China, I realized the urban periphery, urban-rural fringe, was a very important area for the production of food in the informal settlements. So we worked on a very large project, a global project on 3 continents in 3 cities, where we tried to integrate productive growing. Urban agriculture has become a kind of aspirin, but it is not that easy to implement in different locations. That's what was our thesis. The feature of urban agriculture is that it is integrated into the urban economic and ecological system. No 2 neighborhoods are the same, no 2 cities are the same, and in different continents we were facing different situations. It uses urban residents as laborers. They are the ones, if you don't have a good gardener, you can't have a good garden. These are the residents are going to be growing foods. That's important, the labor. Use of urban resources like organic waste, compost, and so on can be used for these purposes. Urban agriculture, well done, could have direct consumer ties. And it could have positive and negative ecological impact on the city and on the urban food system. And this activity competes, like any other business, for urban resources, water, land, and so on. So we worked with 3 cities, Colombo. In Colombo, we identified a very crowded slum on the periphery of the city. Average plot size, about 50 square meters. Very little growing area. However, we worked very closely with the Ayurvedic department because they have 2 parallel systems and they have a very good statistical data and health profile of the residents. So what was needed was improving the slum and shoehorning in the productive growing. What to grow? So the Ayurvedic department established an arboretum and started growing herbal plants which can be used as dietary supplements and distributing them. At the same time, we did physical upgrading as well as showing how to grow in very limited spaces. Here is a demonstration, and they are making demonstration about vertical growing and inclined growing and so on. And these were the formal proposals, which you see, these 3 proposals. But what the residents came up with were very simple, pretty straightforward. They say, this is a good way to plant, just use tire and look at it. Recycled bottles, little plastic bags, containers, so the whole range of things that they came up with, and these were the plants which you could use as a mix with the porridge and so on. Look at bush beans growing in front yard of the house. Herbal as well as decorative plants for sale. Look at where there were water drainage areas and so on, the growth of water absorbing plants like bananas and so on. It just got absorbed very quickly and very effectively. Rosario was a different situation. Rosario, even now in Argentina, the economic situation is a disaster, but at that time, people had chained themselves to the city hall. They said, do something, give us something. The mayor was very progressive, and the idea was that these were the slums on the periphery of the city. They had a lot more space compared to Sri Lanka. They had 250, 300 meter spaces, plus in the tributary of Prana River, they had floodplain areas, so the idea was to integrate urban growing. But we did a complete city level inventory of public open spaces, documented where and how perhaps we can grow food. Those which were flood prone areas, this particular area, and all others were converted into potential growing areas. Where did it go? Okay. And people couldn't read plans, so the easiest way to just lay it all out and explain to them how perhaps we will be laying it all out and setting it up. The complete growing in Rosario is organic. People were taught how to compost, how to ferment certain plants which would work as fertilizer and so on, and combining of waste, domestic waste and others with the other agricultural waste. And to carry them over, city worked very closely. It's a back-breaking job, making a garden. So the city came with its tractor and leveled out things, just to begin with. They made concrete posts so that you can protect your growing areas. And then in between, people just filled it in very quickly. So there was a tremendous understanding that how people can grow and how the city level participation was tremendous. There were design competitions for artists to design scarecrows and then smokers and so on. We were working with a network of international partners. We were working with the UN, we were working with European Union partners, and they helped set up washing, processing, and a kind of value-added selling way of advancing this. City agreed to set up a kind of infrastructure to create markets for these produce. Here you see sawhorses being created, the baskets are there in front of the city hall. City willingly put the market stalls. It's all 100% organic. We have close to 10,000 families in 2010 working in this. And there is a connection made with the buyers and the producers. We have 3 agro industries. There is a typo there. 7 farmers market. $90 to $150 a month they were earning from these programs. People, those who had chained themselves. City has created a land bank. I don't know where it went. It has translated into a very special kind of support network from the formal side that increases the social acceptance and integration of urban agriculture. 17 hectares of gardens on these public lands and parks and other things have been created. Kampala, on one hand, we were trying to do a similar project in terms of building urban agriculture project, where we would build the gardens first and the houses after. That part of the project did not succeed. But the political route proved to be very, very powerful. The mayor of the city, the mayor of the arrondissement, and others made sure very early on, with other groups like ours who were involved in, they became the first city in the world to legalize urban agriculture and aquaculture as a land use in the city. Thank you very much.